The garden is a special place that heals the mind while it nourishes the body. Archaeologists and historians think it's already been more than 10,000 years since we started working the land to feed ourselves. Maybe even longer than that. My name is Mario Doiron, Monsieur Carotte as some people know me. I'm what you'd call a homesteader. I raise poultry and manage my garden to provide food for my family. I do as my ancestors did since the beginning of agriculture. Kent County, my home, is a rural area on the east coast of New Brunswick. We've never been rich around here, but the quality of life is still really good. Folks around here have always been able to make do with very little. Our joie de vivre and appreciation for simple things, like fresh air, good water to drink, and great meals with family and good friends. That's what's really important in life. Our economy relies on fishing, forestry, agriculture, and tourism. In the old days, we had more farmers, but in the last few generations, there have been less and less. Today, there is less than 8% of the food consumed here was locally produced. The cost, quality, and availability of food has become a real concern for many families, especially during volatile and uncertain times like we're going through right now. It's like this everywhere. Many see the solution to this problem in the vegetable garden, but folks have forgotten many of the old agricultural traditions. The purpose of this film is to explore methods to naturally enrich soil vitality, so that it can supply our spiritual, ecological, and nutritional needs. Today's gardens are often modeled on industrial practices. The problem is that agricultural industry's needs, capacities, and priorities are very different from those of gardeners and small-scale producers. Large-scale producers can barely produce a handful of flour on a couple of square meters in a wheat field. But look at the difference of how much more we can produce in the same space in a garden. It doesn't compare. In order to create a profitable product, the industry needs to work the substrate to ensure predictable and uniform production over large areas. They need specialized tests to determine mineral deficiencies. Then they have to go buy and transport chemical amendments to then spread in the correct concentrations with the help of specialized machinery. It's hard to grow plants in dead soil. The problem is that this takes a lot of resources and it's only profitable on a very large scale. Imagine if we treated soil like it was a living organism, composed of a multitude of organisms. We would begin to appreciate the biological symphony that hides among plant roots. Agriculture is a biological, even ecological process. It's not a chemical reaction. The advantage of vegetable gardens is that the land benefits from the love of gardeners. We feed the soil to develop its full potential. Nature is not an enemy to fight. She's a great ally who provides everything you need if you have the vision to see it and the resourceful spirit to make something useful out of it. In return, the earth becomes resilient, productive, and filled with biologically available carbon, overflowing with vitality. We often identify as organic gardeners by listing the things we don't do. We don't use chemicals, pesticides, and herbicides. All this is nice, but it doesn't really answer the critical question: what do we do differently? Instead of identifying with negations, I personally prefer to talk about the population of earthworms, fungi, habitats for insectivores and pollinators, manure management, and the production of compost to improve soil vitality. These are the things that have always created fertile soil. Now let's go talk with Vibke Tinay from the Kokang Sustainable Development Group to talk about environmental impacts when things are not going as they should on farmland.
Vous avez fait un projet pour faire la surveillance des habitats aquatiques. Pourrais-tu nous en parler un petit peu de vos résultats?
Oui, absolument. Donc, c'était vraiment pour identifier les pires endroits pour surtout les nutriments et les bactéries. Donc, c'était pas juste nous autres, c'était vraiment sur la côte Est. Il y a d'autres groupes à Tabusintak, Esquinopetich et Miramichi, Rijibuktu, comme ça, il y a comme une grosse partie là, qui a participé. Et donc, notre but, c'était vraiment identifier les mauvais endroits. Donc, on a fait ça sur 2 ans et on a pu identifier les 2 sites qui sont vraiment problématiques dans notre bassin versant au niveau des comme bactéries, E. coli et aussi les nutriments comme l'azote et le phosphore.
Avez-vous pu trouver qu'est-ce que c'est que les sources? Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça devient, ces choses-là?
Ben, c'est ça, c'est quelque chose qui est comme naturel dans l'eau. Donc, c'est sûr que c'est quelque chose qui augmente avec les chaleurs. Et donc, c'est comme il y a plusieurs facteurs qui font que ça peut donner vraiment des gros taux. Mais on a quand même vu les 2 sites les plus problématiques sont vraiment comme dans des zones agricoles. Donc, le site le plus problématique est très, très proche d'une ferme et je suis comme vraiment désolée de le décrire comme ça parce que comme je suis totalement comme pour notre autosuffisance alimentaire, mais on a pris des échantillons d'eau avant la ferme et après pour vérifier. Et vraiment, avant la ferme, il n'y a aucun problème et après la ferme, c'est dramatique. C'est trop drastique.
Ah oui, c'est ça. Pour nos écouteurs, basically, ce qu'on veut dire, c'est que les déchets descendent de la rivière. Ça fait que ici qu'on trouve le point de source, à monter de là-bas, si l'eau est propre, puis à partir d'un certain point, on commence à avoir des problèmes. On peut soupçonner que c'est de là, de cette région-là, ici, que les problèmes sont d'origine, comme ça.
Oui,
c'est
oui.
ça. C'est ça. Qu'est-ce que c'est que l'impact sur les habitats aquatiques de ces hauts niveaux-là d'azote et de phosphore?
Et c'est ça, il y a un certain montant, c'est sûr que c'est comme juste naturel dans l'eau et les insectes et toute la vie a quand même besoin de ces nutriments pour vivre et pour se multiplier, tout ça. Mais il y a des certains taux qui sont identifiés qui peuvent être un taux problématique pour la pêche, la baignade. Donc, ça veut dire que aussi, par exemple, les mollusques ou les insectes qui vivent là ou les canards après qui vont manger les mollusques, c'est sûr qu'il y a toute une chaîne toujours que vraiment, on a vu, ça dépasse les taux et donc ça fait quand même, il y a des taux qui sont établis pour nous les humains, qu'on ne devrait pas manger des mollusques dans des temps que les taux de, par exemple, E. coli sont dépassés. Là, les E. coli, ça par rapport avec les mollusques, mais plus comme, c'est ça, on a surveillé ça. Et aussi pour la baignade, donc ça encore, c'est plus pour les humains. Et ça, c'est plus par rapport au E. coli avec des... On a vraiment pris les échantillons après les grosses pluies, c'était fait exprès. Et ça donne un peu, ça enlève le goût d'aller se baigner après une grosse pluie. On devrait vraiment prendre des douches après.
Astur, qu'est-ce que les gens pourraient faire pour améliorer les choix qu'ils font sur le terrain pour prévenir ces impacts-là sur l'environnement?
Ben, je crois que c'est surtout de comprendre que toute l'eau est comme connectée, là, et à la fin, ça va se rendre quand même, ben, pas à la fin, une partie du cycle, c'est quand même que ça tombe dans la baie, là. Et quelque chose de très simple pour toi et moi, c'est juste de laisser une petite zone qu'on ne tombe pas. On peut même laisser pousser comme le plus de racines qu'il y a, le mieux que c'est. Et pour les fermiers, on parle vraiment d'un minimum de zone tampon. Je crois que mais les fermiers sont juste obligés de 5 mètres, mais idéalement, je veux dire, on parle de 30 mètres. Ce serait encore mieux pour
C'est ça.
tout
Comme le
filtrer.
résidentiel, lui, est 30 mètres, mais
Oui.
c'est réduit à 5 mètres pour les fermes commerciales.
Et c'est
C'est
pas une
ça?
loi, c'est juste une exception à long terme du ministère de l'Environnement qui
OK.
donne cette exception, mais dans la loi, ça dit vraiment comme tu as besoin d'un permis si tu veux travailler dans 30 mètres de la cour d'eau. Là.
Puis pour les gens qui sont plus sur le système impérial, 30 mètres, ça équivalerait à l'entour de 100 pieds.
Oui, absolument, 100
Ouais.
pieds.
C'est ça. So basically, laissons juste le bord de la rivière pousser naturel avec les broussailles, les arbres, les herbes. Puis les racines là vont intercepter les écoulements d'eau de surface qui sont pleins de ces nutriments-là. Ils vont le pogner puis ils vont l'utiliser une grosse partie de ça avant que ça se ronde au cours d'eau.
Oui, c'est le plus simple, ça aide avec l'érosion, ça aide à filtrer l'eau et diminuer le ruissellement. Donc, c'est pas mal facile à faire pour quelqu'un qui n'aime pas la nature poussée sauvage, on va dire. Il y a quand même plein de manières à rendre ça plus à son goût avec d'autres fleurs, des arbustes décoratifs. Tout est possible.
Our ancestors plowed farmland to eliminate weeds and provide favorable conditions for seed germination. The decomposition of buried plants mixed with manure provided the organic matter needed for soil fertility. Over generations, though, we learned some hard lessons. The land can quickly become exhausted and vulnerable to erosion. Essential nutrients are water soluble, and so follow sediments to contaminate streams instead of remaining available to domestic plants on the land. Now, the tiller is not completely bad if used strategically instead of regularly. When you start a new garden, for example, it's good to turn the earth and incorporate a lot of organic matter in there, like compost, manure, peat moss. The tiller is an important tool to correct severe problems. Some folks cover their garden with a black tarp from harvest to spring planting to eliminate weeds. That's what I do at home. The dark color of the tarp preheats the soil to increase biological activity early in the spring. Many weed seeds germinate and immediately die off because there's no light. It only takes 10 minutes a year and it leaves a beautiful, rich, clean soil that is well structured for seed germination and plant growth. Decomposition is the basis of soil organisms' food chain. Consider fall leaves and wildlife manure in the forest. It falls to the ground and all kinds of little critters consume it and together form humus, the basis on which an entire forest can grow. Nature doesn't need a tiller to do this. All the magic happens on the soil surface. In your garden, you just need to place a layer of compost a few inches thick on the surface with some mulch each year to feed the soil and preserve the water. Fundamentally, compost is making humus in useful quantities. It's a completely natural process. It takes two components of organic matter, that is to say, matter that was once of living origin. Carbon, your browns, and nitrogen, your greens, in proportions of about 20 to 1. Now, browns would be dry leaves, hay, straw, cardboard, paper, and stuff like that. Green is manure, urine, coffee beans, grass clippings, freshly cut leaves, kitchen waste, and even meat, even though that last one is not always a good idea. Each element is placed in thick layers of browns between thin layers of nitrogen and watering as you build the pile. It must be damp but not soaked. And you build it until you have at least a cubic meter of material to make it work. Beneficial aerobic bacteria, that means that they breathe oxygen like the rest of us, heat up the pile while the matter breaks down, and this increases the temperature, further accelerating decomposition. Temperatures can reach around 60 degrees Celsius. Just like a fever, the bad bacteria, that is, anaerobic bacteria that don't need oxygen, and several weed seeds cannot survive these temperatures.
Là, bonjour, ici on est en train de faire une nouvelle pile de compost. Chez nous, j'utilise beaucoup du fumier de poule, mais à la place du fumier, ici on va tondre du gazon. Ça fait qu'on a la tondeuse, puis on va couper le gazon ici, tout le gazon qui est haut. Puis ça va faire notre partie azote. Ça fait on veut une partie azote pour 20 à 30 parties de carbone. Ça fait que on a des feuilles, puis on a du gazon. Ça fait qu'on va mêler les deux ensemble, on va faire du compost avec ça. Directement dans le jardin. On va voir comment ça fait. Maintenant, on a fait notre but de compost. Puis il faut juste mettre une tarpe ou une bâche dessus le fait pour arrêter le trop de pluie à tomber dessus. Il ne faut pas que ça soit trop trempe, il ne faut pas que ça soit trop sec. C'est ça. Ce qu'on cherche pour faire, c'est augmenter la matière organique, augmenter le carbone dans la terre, parce que la vie est faite avec le carbone. On veut de la carbone biologique dans la terre autant que possible. Ça va tenir les nutriments, ça va tenir l'eau, ça va prévenir l'érosion, puis ça va tout faire des bonnes choses pour la vie dans la terre. C'est ça qu'on a besoin pour avoir une bonne croissance de plantes d'une bonne terre saine. Si on laboure trop souvent, on est en train de détériorer la qualité de la terre. On a un avantage temporaire, mais à long terme, ça détériore beaucoup la qualité de la terre. Ça fait qu'on va essayer d'encourager d'utiliser des méthodes sans labourer pour bénéficier de la vie souterraine. On peut regarder qu'est-ce que c'est que ça ressemble, ton compost. Souvent, la surface, elle est sec, elle n'est pas compostée. Mais aussi que tu creuses dedans, ouais.
Oh, wow.
Tu vois, super riche. Puis c'est encore fibreux. Puis c'est parfait.
During the process of transformation of that organic matter, there are many nutrients that leach into the soil directly below the compost pile. It's better not to waste any of that goodness. That's why we made the compost right in the garden instead of on the other end of the property. Then it does not need to be transported to the garden. It just needs to be spread around in the surrounding garden beds. It saves labor and maximizes the fertility that comes from your compost. We don't need to plow it in either. We just need to spread it like mulch. Soil organisms know what to do with it, and the plants just love it. Compost doesn't need to be complicated to work well. It does not need to be expensive either. Anyone can do it at home, and divert a lot of waste away from the dump. It's good to recycle all that organic matter you produce at home every day, just like Mother Nature has been doing all along. Okay, here we are, our beautiful well-tilled soil, and a comparable volume of untilled soil, with all of its structure intact, with open spaces in it. See, when you water them both, what happens? Does the water seep in? No. Fine powder is hydrophobic. If you want to come and see this on the surface there? The water just sits on there, and eventually some might go in, but most of it runs off. But here, it's absorbing all of the water. You see, that's erosion. It's nutrient loss. It goes into the river. It harms the river. You see, we need our garden soil to behave like a sponge. That is what gives us resilience in dry weather. In dry, hot summer, the water has already infiltrated into the soil, and the plants have it available. But this one here is all dry. There's nothing. It never held any water at all. So you water and you water your garden, but still your plants are suffering. Hey, you want to see the difference between organic no-till soil compared to normal garden soil that is plowed all the time? Looky here. This soil drinks water. I hose it down and the water disappears. I hose it down and the water disappears. That's the difference. For a land that started out as heavy clay that didn't absorb water at all, that's pretty good. That's the difference. No-till. That makes better soil that works. Here are soil samples taken from 3 sites. The first 2 are taken from Kakang Community Garden. Sample number 1 comes from a section of the garden that was tilled as usual. Sample number 2 was taken right next to the first sample in a section of the garden that has not been plowed this year. On the contrary, a tarp has covered the ground from the previous fall through winter and into the spring. The third sample was taken from my organic garden that has not been plowed for 10 years. You will notice that the soil samples are small and fragile in the first few samples, but they are larger by the end. There's a reason for this.
Comparé à les autres jardins, il n'y avait pas de... Ça venait pas en chunk comme ça. Puis remarquez là, les trous, les petits tunnels partout, toutes sortes de structures qui sont dans ça là. C'est ça qu'on parle about là. Ben, on va voir comment c'est que ça fonctionne ça.
This test here demonstrates the stability of agricultural land in the presence of water. There are a few crumbs that fall immediately when you add it to the water. That's normal. But notice how the color of the water with the first sample has changed. The soil particles continue to fall. That demonstrates a loss of nutrients and severe sedimentation. Imagine what happens during a heavy rainstorm. There's no current in the bottle. A storm would cause much more damage. Now, we plow our land to eliminate weeds, encourage germination and the growth of small roots. We imagine that fluffy soil is ideal for that, but that's only partially true. What we forget is that in the long term, this practice reduces the volume of arable land on the ground every year. Surface water runoff carries large volumes of soil to the waterways. Look how the bottom of the bottle receives that sediment. This represents long-term loss of productivity of our arable land. This is very costly for farmers as their land requires more and more intervention to maintain production. We add fertilizer, but we lose it the next rain. Herbicides and pesticides help sickly plants grow because we're trying to grow them in dead soil. At the end of the day, it's a reduction in profits for local agricultural producers. Here, let's see the second sample. If you remember, this one comes from a section of the garden that we stopped tilling last year. It looks pretty similar to the first sample. The water has changed color, look. Crumbs fall, but not as much, eh? Already, we see an improvement in the performance of the soil. Worms have had time to create little tunnels, and microscopic organisms have been able to release some glue to aggregate soil particles to preserve its structure a little. The soil is still vulnerable to erosion, but not so severely. Take note that the sediment accumulated at the bottom of the bottle is much reduced. It's not too bad. Now let's look at the third sample that comes from my garden at home. This one hasn't been plowed for 10 years. Every fall, I add compost on the surface and cover it with a tarp until spring planting time. This way there are no weeds, and then there is a buildup of plant root fibers. Look, when I tried to break the pieces, it binds soil aggregates together kind of like rebar. There are tunnels that allow infiltration of water and air. The dark color of the soil indicates a high level of organic matter. Again, there are a few little crumbs that dropped when inserting the sample in the water. This is normal, but notice that the color of the water has remained clear. This soil here doesn't lose its nutrients as easily. It is stable in the presence of water, less vulnerable to erosion. Organic matter, nutrients, and fertility in general has a chance to accumulate each year. This system creates good earth instead of deteriorating it. So here we are in the St. Mary Sharing Garden in St. Mary de Kent. This is the new garden that we established last year. Over here, the garden is on a slope, going uphill over there. That's why we want to stop rainwater. Hold on to it and let it seep in. And just like that, it reduces the chore of watering in the garden. We use less well water, which tends to dry up during the summer months here. So we wanted to reduce the impact on water resources for our neighbors. So we used a transformation of the shape of the land to intercept surface water and keep all of it. Then we add cardboard so weeds don't grow back. And we cover everything with wood chips to hold water, prevent evaporation. So the paths are like level ditches. When it rains, the water accumulates there and stays there. And then it slowly seeps in. There's a lot of long-term humidity for my plants. When it gets hot between the rains, that water is there below the earth, available to my plants. Chances are good I won't need to water them. So there. It makes beautiful, healthy plants that drink well and are capable of fighting off pests and diseases. As you see, it's clean, not muddy. There's no weeds, and it makes a pleasant setup to come and tend your garden. On top of that, we had a tank installed at the corner of the shed right there that collects water from the roof. Then it's piped to those little blue barrels on the four corners of the garden. That way it's available for gardeners to come and water their gardens as needed. I hope this film has been helpful in unveiling some myths about agricultural production. Our intention is not to point the fingers at anybody. Certainly not to vilify farmers. On the contrary, we're trying to demonstrate these principles in practical and easy to understand terms to equip people with the tools that will increase their productivity while we improve our carbon footprint. Our organization seeks to improve access to good, fresh food for vulnerable people, especially during these difficult times. We have seen how fragile the system is as it currently exists. There are folks who see the potential in local agricultural industry. This could meet many of our regional needs. It's good, fertile earth that grows food. We need to build our agricultural systems on a foundation that will increase the volume and quality of arable land. This takes planning. But if you're well equipped with effective principles that are frugal with our natural resources and increase profits for producers, we might have a chance at long-term success. The big difference is that takes more pairs of hands to work, more jobs. Agriculture production has always been organic since its inception. There's no reason to think that it's not able to provide for our modern needs. Nature has not changed, but we have better tools now, materials, and technologies that were not available to our ancestors. All it takes is an observant eye, a good work ethic, and team spirit. If you want help planning your land in preparation for an environmentally conscious agricultural system, your local watershed group could be very helpful. These passionate professionals are very happy to answer all your questions, offer consultations, and through their extensive networks, put you in contact with appropriate specialists to help you achieve your goals. In the meantime, check our YouTube page, Inclusion Kent, for a series of educational gardening videos. And don't forget to check the full versions of the clips on this video right here in the top corner, and links in the description below.